Welcome. Welcome to Dave's Spooky Stories. Tonight we'll be telling late shift stories. Please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you think and what topics you'd like in the future. Story number 1, The Cheese Factory. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, and the fluorescent lights cast their usual eerie glow over the cheese factory's processing floor. The air was heavy with the sharp, tangy scent of aging cheddar, mixed with the mechanical hum of conveyor belts. I'd been working the late shift for 3 years now. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Most nights it was just me, a skeleton crew of 4, and the occasional long-distance trucker dropping off or picking up shipments. Tonight, however, it was different. The new guy, Ethan, he said his name was, had been assigned to the overnight crew. He was tall and wiry, with pale, almost translucent skin. His eyes, a murky shade of green, never seemed to blink. He kept to himself during the 10-minute safety briefing, standing silently at the back of the group while the floor supervisor went over the usual protocols. Something about Ethan made me uneasy from the start. Maybe it was the way he watched people, his gaze lingering just a fraction too long, or the way his lips twitched into a smile when no one was talking to him. But I brushed it off. People are weird sometimes. Who was I to judge? Our shift began like any other. I was stationed at the packaging line, boxing blocks of cheese as they rolled off the belt. Across the room, Ethan was tasked with cleaning up one of the large mixing vats used for blending curds. It was hard, tedious work, especially in the dead of night. The occasional clang of his cleaning tools echoed through the otherwise quiet factory, a sound that should have been mundane, but somehow made my skin crawl. I told myself I was being paranoid. "It's just a new guy," I muttered under my breath, sliding another box into finished stack. Just a new guy. An hour into the shift, strange things started happening. It began with the lights. At first they flickered, not uncommon in an old building like this, but then they dimmed, almost to the point of going out entirely, before surging back to full brightness. I glanced around. No one else seemed to notice, or at least they weren't reacting. "It must be the electrical again," I said out loud, more to myself than to anyone else. Ethan looked up from his vat, his expression blank, but his head cocked slightly, as if he'd heard me. Then he smiled, one of those slow, deliberate smiles that didn't quite reach his eyes, and he went back to work. The incident with the lights unnerved me, but what happened next left me genuinely shaken. Around 1:30 a.m., I stepped away from the packaging line to grab a drink from the break room. I'd left my stainless steel water bottle there earlier, perched on the edge of the counter, exactly where I always placed it. When I entered the break room, I froze. My bottle wasn't on the counter. Instead, it was on the far end of the room, sitting squarely in the middle of the table. The lid was unscrewed, resting neatly beside it. I frowned. "Who moved this?" I muttered, scanning the empty room. My pulse quickened as I approached the bottle, inspecting it, as if it might offer answers. The thought crossed my mind that one of the crew might have played a prank, but that didn't make sense. Everyone had their hands full with their tasks. And why bother moving a water bottle anyway? It wasn't funny. It was just odd. Uneasy, I screwed the lid back on, grabbed the bottle, and left the room quickly. As I walked back toward my station, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But the hallway was empty, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the ventilation system. When I returned to the packaging line, Ethan was standing uncomfortably close to my workspace. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, his head tilted slightly to the side, as if he were studying me. You need something? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer right away. Then in a low, almost monotone voice, he said, "Do you ever think about what's in the cheese?" I blinked. "What?" "The cheese," he repeated, his green eyes locking into mine. "Do you ever think about what's really in it?" I forced a laugh. Yeah, milk and salt. Maybe some cultures if you're feeling fancy." Ethan's smile widened, revealing teeth that were almost too perfect. "Interesting," he said softly, then turned and walked away. I couldn't concentrate for the rest of the shift. Every time I glanced in Ethan's direction, he was watching me. Or at least, it felt like he was. Once or twice I caught him standing near the storage area, staring at the door, as if he were waiting for something, or someone, to come out. By the end of the night, my nerves were shot. As I clocked out and grabbed my jacket, I told myself I was overreacting. Ethan was probably just awkward, maybe even socially anxious. Lots of people were, no big deal. Still, as I walked toward my car in the dark, empty parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone as I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see Ethan standing there, his pale face illuminated by the factory security lights. But there was nothing. I slid into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I pulled out onto the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. For just a second, I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the lot, watching me drive away. But when I looked again, it was gone. Story number 2. Winnebago. Back in the 1980s, I worked the night shift as a nurse at Winnebago Mental Health Institute. It wasn't the kind of job people took lightly. If you stayed there long enough, the place could start to get under your skin. It wasn't just the patients, though they were challenging enough. It was the weight of the building itself, the sense that it had more than anyone could truly understand. Winnebago carried its history in every creak of the floorboards and every chipped bit of paint on the walls. The patients ranged from the severely mentally ill to the forgotten, and some of the oldest had been lobotomized back in the 1940s and 1950s. They were left in a sort of limbo, not fully present, but not gone either. One of these patients was Mrs. Grayson. She was small and frail, her hair thin and white, and she spent most of her days sitting quietly by the window in her room. If she spoke, it was in mumbles, but mostly she just stared. Sometimes I wondered what she saw out there, beyond the grounds. Then there was the cemetery. Everyone who worked at Winnebago knew about it, but we didn't talk about it. It sat on the far edge of the property, hidden behind a line of old oaks. The graves were unmarked, just small depressions in the soil. It was where they buried patients who had no family or whose families wanted nothing to do with them. I'd only been there a handful of times during the day, and even then it was unsettling. It wasn't just the stillness of the place. It was the feeling that the people buried there had been forgotten in life, and now forgotten in death. One night, I was working the graveyard shift. The name felt especially fitting that evening. It was quiet, too quiet, even for Winnebago. The air felt heavy, and there was a strange stillness to the ward. As I made my rounds, I checked in on Mrs. Grayson. She was in her usual spot by the window, staring out into the night. For some reason, I hesitated before moving on. Something about the way she was sitting seemed different, more deliberate. "Everything okay, Mrs. Grayson?" I asked softly, stepping closer. Her eyes, normally dull and unfocused, had a strange intensity to them. It was like she was looking at something far away, something I couldn't see. I felt a chill, but shook it off and continued with my rounds. A few hours later, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, shuffling footsteps. My first thought was that one of the patients had wandered out of their room, but when I turned the corner, my stomach dropped. It was Miss Grayson. She was standing at the far end of the hallway, near the door that led to the grounds. Her posture was strange, rigid, almost like she was straining towards something. "Miss Grayson," I called, trying to keep my voice calm. "You shouldn't be out here. Let me help you back to your room." She didn't move. Her thin shoulders barely seemed to rise and fall as she breathed. I walked toward her, my pulse quickening with each step. When I reached her, I gently touched her arm. She turned to me, and her lips moved, but the words were so soft I had to lean in to hear. "They're waiting," she whispered. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Who's waiting?" I asked. Miss Grayson just pointed toward the door. Her hand trembled as she did, but her expression didn't change. I wasn't sure what to do, but I couldn't leave her standing there. Slowly, I guided her back to her room. She didn't resist, but as I tucked her back into bed, she muttered something else. "They don't have names." I stayed with her for a while after that, unsure of what to make of her words. Eventually, I forced myself to move on. It was nearly dawn by the time my shift ended. I told the morning staff about what had happened, and they promised to keep an eye on her. Over the next few nights, things only got stranger. Miss Grayson began appearing in odd places, always near a door or a window, always looking out. Once I found her standing by the supply closet, her hands resting on the frame of the door like she was listening to something inside. Another time, she was sitting in the common area, facing the large windows that overlooked the grounds. She never gave me an explanation, just muttered cryptic phrases like, "They're still there," or "They're not done waiting." One evening I found her outside, standing at the edge of the cemetery. Her thin gown fluttered in the breeze, and she seemed so small, so frail against the vastness of the graves. When I reached her, she turned to me with those same intense eyes. "You'll see," she said softly. "They never leave." I helped her back inside again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something out there, something she understood in a way I never could. After that night, I couldn't bring myself to go near the cemetery. Even during the day, it felt different, colder, heavier. I stayed at Winnebago for a few more years, but the memory of those nights with Miss Grayson never left me. Even now, decades later, I still wonder what she saw out there in the darkness. Story number 3, The Fair. Driving a cab in Milwaukee is a special kind of job. You get to see the city from a perspective most people never do. And by perspective, I mean through a cracked windshield while dodging potholes the size of kiddie pools. Wednesday nights are usually quiet, which is fine by me. The late shift lets me avoid rush hour and the weekend bar crowd. That night, I had just dropped off a fare near Brady Street, one of those chatty types who rambled about the energy of the city like he was auditioning for a travel commercial. After he got out, I sighed, adjusted my seat, and waited for my next ride request. It came in soon enough. A pickup all the way out in Bayview. I hesitated for half a second, but accepted it. Business is business. The app gave me a route, and I set off. That part of town usually wasn't bad, but lately the whole city felt like it was under construction. Detours popped up faster than the orange cones themselves, and sometimes I wondered if the map app developers were in on the chaos. Still, the app insisted it had the best way through, so I followed its cheesy little arrow. Things got weird pretty quickly. The first turn the app suggested took me down a street that was completely torn up. Dirt and gravel stretched ahead, flanked by half-built scaffolding and construction equipment that looked abandoned. I tried rerouting, but every option it gave me led back to the same place. Streets I knew like the back of my hand suddenly didn't look familiar anymore, like someone had shifted them around when I wasn't looking. After circling the same barricades for what felt like the 10th time, I found myself on a narrow, unfamiliar road. The streetlights here buzzed faintly, their light flickering in and out. The fog that had rolled in earlier was thicker now, swallowing everything beyond my headlights. I gripped the wheel a little tighter. Milwaukee wasn't exactly spooky, but there was something about this stretch of road that felt wrong, too quiet. Then I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the road, just barely visible in the glow of my high beams, a tall guy, wearing a long coat, just standing there with his back to me. I slowed the car out of instinct, though every part of me screamed to keep going. Maybe it was the isolation, or maybe it was just that primal part of your brain that doesn't like unexplained things, but he set off every alarm bell in my head. I crept closer, half expecting him to turn around or start walking away. He didn't. He just stood there, as still as the fog itself. My pulse quickened. Without thinking, I swerved slightly to avoid him and kept driving. After a few seconds, curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was gone. My stomach flipped. I didn't see any place he could have gone. Not with how open the road was. No trees, no alleyways, nothing. My heart raced as I forced myself to focus on the road ahead. Don't think about it, I muttered to myself. It's late. Your brain's playing tricks. The app pinged again, pulling me out of my thoughts. It directed me toward a narrow, winding street I didn't recognize. At this point, I just wanted to finish the ride and go home, so I followed it. The road was lined with a row of dark buildings, their windows empty and lifeless. Everything felt deserted, like the city had decided to go to sleep and left me behind. And then came the figures. They were scattered along the sides of the street, motionless silhouettes standing in the shadows, just out of the reach of my headlights. I slowed the car, squinting to make sense of what I was seeing. There were at least 5 of them, evenly spaced like they were marking territory. None of them moved, but I felt their eyes on me. This has to be a prank, I whispered, my voice sounding small in the empty cab. A really stupid, elaborate prank. I sped up, my tires kicking up loose gravel as I passed them. The figures didn't react. No heads turned, no arms lifted up. It was like they weren't real, and maybe they were just waiting for something I didn't want to know about. The app chimed again, directing me toward a tunnel. I froze when I saw it. Milwaukee didn't have tunnels like this. Old and crumbling, with bricks stained black from decades of whatever happens to bricks in a nightmare. I stared at it for a long time, debating whether to turn back. Then my phone buzzed. Rider canceled. I stared at the notification like it was mocking me. After everything, the fare had bailed. I closed the app and turned the car around, refusing to go another foot toward that tunnel. As I retraced my route, the fog began to lift, and the road started looking normal again, familiar. By the time I made it back to the downtown, I felt like I had escaped something I couldn't explain, and I wasn't about to try. I still drive nights, but I've learned to ignore the app when it tries to lead me into construction zones. I trust my instincts now, and when I see a figure standing in the shadows, I don't stop to look twice. Some roads are better left unexplored. Story number 4, Nosferatu. Nosferatu, that black and white nightmare of a movie, had been rattling around in my brain all evening. I'd watched it earlier, thinking it'd be the perfect way to kill time before my shift. Big mistake. The pale, hollow-eyed Count Orlok creeping out of the shadows stuck with me so strongly I half expected to see him lurking in the corners of the zoo when I clocked in. The zoo at night is a strange place. Empty paths, eerily silent animal enclosures, and the occasional rustle of leaves that sounds way too much like footsteps for comfort. I was the night watchman, keeping an eye on the bat house of all places. The zoo had over 200 bats, mostly fruit bats and flying foxes, and my job was to make sure nothing weird happened. Well, not too weird. After Nosferatu, I wasn't sure where the line was anymore. The bat house was a standalone building with blacked-out windows and heavy doors designed to keep the little critters from escaping. Walking into it at night was like stepping into another world. A dark, humid cave filled with faint squeaks, rustling wings, and a smell that could only be described as fruit that died before achieving greatness. I wasn't scared of bats, no. But Nosferatu had put them into a new light. Well, more like a shadow. Now they weren't just fascinating flying mammals. They were potential accomplices of the undead. That night, everything felt wrong. The air was heavier than usual, and the rustling of wings seemed off, like it wasn't coming from the usual corners. I flicked on my flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness and bouncing off the glossy eyes of the bats hanging upside down. Most of them didn't react, just little bundles of fur and wings tucked neatly away, sleeping like tiny vampires. But a few weren't sleeping. They were awake, watching. I swear they were watching me. I tried to shake it off. Get a grip, man, I muttered to myself, the sound barely louder than the squeaks echoing from the high rafters. I started my rounds, checking the perimeter of the bat house and keeping an ear out for any sign of trouble. About halfway through, I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from the far corner. Heart pounding, I swung my flashlight toward the noise. The beam illuminated a row of fruit crates stacked against the wall. Nothing unusual, but the scratching continued. With shaking hands, I moved closer, peering around the crates. Just as I leaned in, a bat shot out from the shadows, its wings flapping furiously as it zipped past my head. I yelped, loudly, embarrassingly, and nearly dropped my flashlight. Just a bat, I told myself, my voice shaking. You're a grown man. You don't scream at bats. But that wasn't the end of it. The scratching grew louder, echoing now, like claws scraping against stone. I turned again, my flashlight catching movement near the rafters. A cluster of bats was swirling, their wings beating in synchronized chaos. And in the middle of them, silhouetted against the dim glow of the emergency lights, was something. It wasn't a bat. It was bigger, human-shaped almost. My brain went into overdrive, frantically trying to convince me I wasn't seeing Count Orlok himself hanging from the rafters of the bat house. I backed away, my flashlight trembling as I kept it fixed on the shape. Who's there? I stammered, my voice cracking. The scratching stopped. The swirling bats settled, folding their wings and returning to their perches. The figure was gone. Just like that. I stood there frozen, my heart racing, waiting for something, anything, to happen, but the silence was deafening. I forced myself to finish my rounds, every squeak and rustle now sounding like the precursor to my doom. By the time I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a lifeline. The bat house could keep its secrets. I wasn't about to go digging any deeper. The next morning I tried to explain what I'd seen to my supervisor. Nosferatu, huh? he asked, clearly amused. How'd you know? Everyone who works night watch in the Bat House watches Nosferatu, and everyone regrets it. I quit the zoo a few months later, not because of the bats. They were fine. But because I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was watching me every time I stepped into that house. Nosferatu may have been fiction, but sometimes, under the cover of night, fiction doesn't feel so far away. Wah. Story number 5. The Wax Factory. Back in the 1990s, I worked the late shift at a wax factory in a small industrial town in the Fox Valley. The factory itself was a sprawling hulk of concrete and metal, filled with giant vats of molten wax that churned day and night. The air inside always smelled sharp and chemical, with a faint sweetness lingering underneath, like candles. You got used to it eventually, though it clung to your clothes even after you went home. That night started off like any other. Carl, our supervisor, spent most of the shift tucked away in his office with the paperwork, while Randy and I worked the machines on the floor. Randy was one of those guys who could make you laugh no matter how miserable you were, cracking jokes about the wax clumps stuck to his boots, or humming ridiculous jingles about the factory's outdated equipment. It wasn't much, but it kept the monotony at bay. It must have been around 11 p.m. when Carl walked out of his office, sniffing the air like he'd caught wind of something. "You smell that?" he asked, stopping in front of us. I paused, taking a deep breath. At first I didn't catch anything, just the usual factory smell, the wax, the chemicals, the candles. Then I noticed it, something sharper, almost metallic, mixed in. Smoke. Randy scoffed, grinning as usual. Probably just one of the machines overheating again. Or maybe you left the toaster running in there, Carl. But Carl wasn't joking. His face tightened, and he marched toward the far corner of the floor where the older machines were. Randy and I exchanged uneasy glances but followed him. The smell grew stronger as we moved closer, clawing at our throats. Then we saw it, a thin, curling wisp of smoke rising from beneath one of the vats. "Get the extinguisher!" Carl barked, his voice sharp. Randy and I scrambled to grab it, but before we could even reach it, things spiraled out of control. The smoke thickened, spreading fast, and the machine started groaning louder than usual. Carl tried shouting orders over the noise, but his voice was drowned out. Within minutes, the entire room was engulfed in thick, choking smoke. The alarms didn't go off. The system was ancient, practically held together with duct tape, and we were left stumbling blind through the haze. Carl disappeared into the chaos, likely trying to shut down the equipment before things got worse. Randy and I tried to follow, but the smoke was overpowering. My eyes burned, my lungs felt like they were being crushed, and the heat from the vats was unbearable. I couldn't see anything, just vague shapes in the gray haze. At some point my hand grabbed my arm and shouted, "We gotta get out, and we gotta go!" We turned and bolted for the exit, leaving behind everything but our lives, including our jackets. The smoke followed us out, thick and relentless, billowing into the night sky. When we reached the parking lot, Carl burst out behind us, coughing and gasping for air. His face was pale, but he was alive. "Get in your car," he rasped. "The whole place is going to blow." I didn't ask questions. I jumped into my Chevy, Randy riding shotgun, and we tore out of there so fast my tires nearly skidded. We crossed the old bridge, over the river, and parked on the other side, watching as the factory lit up like a bonfire. Flames shot up from the roof, curling and twisting into the sky. The smoke was thick and black, blotting out the stars, and the heat radiated so intensely we could feel it from even across the waters. We were listening to the oldie station playing "Smoke on the Water" by Deep Purple. We sat there in stunned silence, watching the factory burn. Randy broke the silence first, though his usual humor was gone. "Think insurance covers the jackets?" he asked, his voice shaky. I glanced at him, and for the first time all night, I cracked a smile. They better. I'll be sending them the bill. But it wasn't just the jackets we lost. The factory was gone. By the time the fire trucks arrived, there wasn't much they could do. Decades of machinery, paperwork, and history went up in smoke. And for the three of us, it meant we were out of jobs. Looking back, I still wonder how we made it out of there alive. That fire could have easily trapped us inside, the smoke overwhelming us before we found the door. And every now and then, when I drive over that bridge, I look out at the empty lot where the factory used to stand. Nothing's been built there since. It's just an abandoned patch of concrete, scorched and cracked, a reminder of the night we escaped something far worse than just a lost jacket. Even now, over 30 years later, chunks of wax wash up on the sandy banks of the river. Well, that wraps it up for tonight's collection of late shift stories. Hope you enjoyed them. Until next time, good night.